So for a change of pace, we're actually not going to have a talk. I know that my name was on the schedule as a speaker, but I'm going to be more of a moderator. Hi, I'm Bruno. I'm behind the project called Design is for Everyone. And actually what you're going to see right now is a podcast recording on stage, basically. We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to be joined by 3 of the other speakers, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So please welcome on stage Benny, João, and Kate. Go ahead. Sure. Probably. So, for context, and for them to also, I already told them what this project is all about, but it's starting a few years ago, I started noticing how with the world of design being more and more prevalent into businesses and into the way that we actually do our day-to-day, I kind of went with the decision like, yeah, why don't other people learn about this? So I started thinking about what if everyone learned about design? And I didn't really have to do much about it. The world kind of started evolving. And that's where this post-democratization era comes about. Like, in my opinion, nowadays, people think or know a little bit more about design. It's like, it's open. Everyone in this room has most likely had a conversation with people that understand or don't understand design, but believe at least that they can use a couple of tools or something like that. And I know that there are probably many haters or lovers of Canva here, but that's, for example, one of the best examples on the market here. So today, the idea is for the 3 of us, the 3 of them and me here, to discuss a little bit about that, but I'm going to handle it as I do with every episode of my podcast. So all my podcasts start without a proper introduction, but I'm going to ask them a little bit to present themselves. And my first question, and it can be like, we can start here with Kate and then go one-on-one. I would love if you could present yourselves and how you got into design in the first place. So, Kate, if you want to start.
All right. We've got 5 hours each, yeah?
I would love to do so, but no.
Okay. Graphic design. I was brought into graphic design because I was in an art school and everybody was making crazy sculptures and paintings. And I just kept asking, what is the intention of this piece? What is the interaction and what is the outcome and how can I optimize it? And I was really interested in engineering to serve certain outcomes. And my teacher said, yeah, you might be more interested in graphical communication than expression and art. So that's how I got into it. And I started out as a freelancer and contracted in many different places. I realized very quickly that staying in one place for too long wasn't for me because I was so curious. And so I contracted for over 8 years. Then I did a little bit of Facebook as a permanent employee so I could understand what it felt like to be a cog in the machine. And then I quickly realized that coaching was what I loved. So that's what I've been doing since. And to keep my blade sharp, I also I'm head of design in a real world, because otherwise you get lazy.
Everyone knows that, of course.
That's it.
João?
So it's kind of a similar story in the sense of like, I had no idea what design was, so I was really into graffiti. That's pretty much like the most tangible thing that got me into what I do nowadays. And it ended up being kind of like a mistake, which is also something beautiful about the creative process, is how my career kind of started, because there was a lot of pressure like some 15 years ago that if you're fairly creative, maybe you want to go into painting, architecture, or maybe both. But design was not like, at least was not exposed in my circle, in my community, like the same way that these 2 areas were, because there's like also like a really close relation to the employment. So if you really want to do something creative in employment, pick one of these 2. So I ended up going to uni in Lisbon, and there I got like acquainted to, like this thing existed, it started to take shape, and then I was just like this whole problem solving. It's my jam. And I moved to London 8 years ago, where I've been working most of my time like as a freelancer in big like branding and consulting agencies. And as a side, which will be part of, or like my talk after, will be about typography, which is a big passion And I'll have a whole session to get into that detail.
Benny?
Cool. So, okay, for me, it was graphic design. Similarly, I didn't know what it was, but what happened for me was in my last year of high school, I went to those organized open days of universities, not knowing what I was going to do because I had good grades and lots of interests, but I couldn't really picture myself in any job. So I just collected leaflets and I went to presentations for all the departments. And the overwhelming feeling that I had at the end of the day was that those leaflets were crap. And the pagination was so bad. Like for the literature department, I got an A4 page with just black text. I was never going to read that. It really upset me. And I realized that maybe that's what I wanted to do. Maybe I would be good at visual communication. And then I realized that I'd been doing that all along because I have the most color-coded notes of my whole high school. And yeah. So I went to a graphic school. I didn't love it just because I think most people that were with me at that graphic school saw themselves more as artists than communicators. But then I moved to London immediately after. And UX was becoming a thing those days. And yeah, that was much more up my street.
Right. I'm kind of mirror a little bit the experience of João also. Like I don't think anyone around me even knew what design was when I was about to go to college. I learned to play with tools very young. Again, ADHD prophets, that you can actually learn things just because tweaking with it's fun. And I remember being 10-year-old playing with Macromedia Flash. It's like, that's not normal, but I found it on a computer on like an informatics course or something like that. But it really kind of led to that moment where when I had to go to college, I decided, I want to do cool things. And at first I thought, I'm going to be an animator for Pixar, but then I immediately forgot that once I started doing things. But and eventually now I work in branding, mostly brand design. But as with many creatives and many people that work in Portugal, I'm one of those people that has to do four or five roles into one person, although I have a big team. But it has been very fun to see how everyone has these little different journeys with little highlights like that. So my first question to all of you, and very much with this topic, I believe, and it is my belief, but I love to have this conversation because I want everyone else's point of view, that the world has changed their perspective on design, right? Since we started our careers, since we started doing the stuff that we do, and we do it right now, probably also very differently from what it was back then. Almost everyone here started like, I started in graphic or I started in graffiti. So like, what you seen as like the biggest changes since you joined the world of design in terms of the perspective that people have on our work? Let's put it like that. Anyone can be helpful.
I can share like my experience with peers in the industry, specifically like the niche that is type design, because it's an area that is inside graphic design. Like you don't have it's not common to have a relationship directly to a client, although that exists. But it means that it's like kind of need to know graphic design or design, then graphic design, and then type design. And what I've realized is that I've worked with people that they went to uni straight to study type design. So they already knew that there was like enough to just like study something as specific as that. And to me, that was not even a thing. I wouldn't question when I was like 17 or 16 years old that fonts were something that there was like a person behind, like developing that. And that was like, now I know a lot of work in order to ship like a font family and whatnot. So that to me was like one of the things that I feel like the online communities, like the community that I had available next to me was much narrower. And now you can choose and you can look for them and you're able to find them, which was something that back in the days I felt that was a little bit more difficult just to find, or more importantly, like as a general note, to know that a certain thing exists and you have that nowadays.
That's interesting. I have I think, so you were saying your perspective is from a bit niche. I'm thinking from the perspective of having always worked in-house at tech companies. What I noticed that changed in other people's perception is very much, what is a designer? What are they supposed to be doing? And it changed in very surprising ways. When I started, it was the web designer on Photoshop. Then it became the digital designer. And suddenly you had an advantage if you knew how to code, and you were almost expected, like web designer job descriptions said HTML, CSS knowledge required. Now, it went almost on the other side with UX, with design thinking. Design has much more of a seat at the table in product strategy, which is great. However, we end up being product manager a lot of the time. So 10 years ago, you needed to know coding languages. Now you need to know a whole different set of skills. I'm not convinced that in any of this spectrum of situations, people actually knew what design was.
Which is very common, I would say. And Kate, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you were saying about moving from how things look and feel to what's the strategy. I think the biggest shift in the last 2 years, even 5 years, I would say, design, especially in my coaching, when people come to me and say, oh, I'm struggling with this, it was, no one's listening to me. I'm not getting the influence that I want in my team and in my products. Now it's, people are listening to me, but I don't know what to do. So for so long, they were whining about not getting enough attention. Now they have the attention. Now they have the seat at the table, as you say. And it's like, well, what are you going to say? So I think that's quite a big shift, and we need to kind of pick up with that. The other thing is, because our world is more connected and global, we're never dealing with one touch point. So UX designers traditionally had to think about a website, an app. And now it's really important that as designers we think about systems, and we think about, where does someone come from before they come to the website? Where do they go after? Where do we fit in the bigger the puzzle? So I think there's a kind of bigger perspective. We need to have the ability to zoom out and then zoom in like the helicopter at all levels. And I think that's a new skill too.
Yeah, actually, if I can add on that, there were certain specialisms that developed over time. Like I was saying, from web designer, then there was UX, and then UX research, and then service design. And I saw a lot of other titles, but I'm not even going to mention them because some do sound made up, but those are...
There are way too many.
Yeah, but it is quite telling that now service design is considered to be part of design, and service design helps a lot more with that systemic thinking, and it's quite fascinating. If they knew how to use us, that would be ace.
I think that it's fairly common, and I've heard it many times, like people just looking at that. And if you look at the... I don't know about your guys' opinion, but if you look at the way that the titles around design change based on context, if you are in the fashion world, design is one thing. If you are in the tech world, design is one thing. If you are in the graphics world, design is another thing. Like, people have their own definitions of design, which begs for the next question, which is, do you think there's a good definition of design? Do you think like there's actually something that defines what design is that people can actually understand in the market?
I think there is, but I think that we would all have our own and disagree about it. So I don't think that there is a universal one, basically.
Good answer, I would say. You guys agree, disagree?
I agree with that. I like Katie Dill. She's the head of design at Stripe. And she said that designers interrogate the present to reimagine the future. And I keep coming back to that again and again. It just sits with me well. It just feels like a really comfy jumper. Yeah. Yeah,
and it feels like our job actually has an impact just from those words. That's probably the most eloquent way that I've ever heard someone trying to define design in such a small sentence. which is fun.
To interrogate the present and reimagine the future. And that's also very active, you know? I like that as well.
Yeah, I think it's something that it has to go with purpose. I think that's something that is really important and at the core of design as an industry. It's just like questioning why you're doing that and understanding the context. Is it relevant to spend my time on this? Because once you get to a certain age, you start to interrogate like the time that you spend doing some stuff and the contribution that you may or may not give with what you want to do. So that lens of like focusing like on a problem and then like thinking about the future, it's basically like we have the opportunity like at different scales in different areas just to have a bit of an impact that will create like a ripple effect in where you work, with the people that you work with, and also ultimately, of course, to the people that you work for and that you're producing. So it's really hard. Like I've been asked this question since the university days, and I will always change my answer to what design is. It's just like really difficult.
While I do really like that definition that you used, but on the other hand, I have a bit of there's something nagging me about defining design because it feels like gatekeeping almost, or that there is a risk of gatekeeping. Because, for example, sometimes I get into discussions at work, there's misunderstandings over where will my team get involved because they need to design a structure or an API, but the word design is in there, and so they're like, does that mean that we ask the designers? Like, no, it's a slightly different thing, but then is it? But then I don't know, because designing organizations, for example, it's a completely different concept, but we would probably be great at it. Some of us already do it. It becomes such a holistic concept that it's almost culty.
It's a good way to talk about it. And picking a little bit on what João said and you said, I think like even experience, like the moment you start entering the world of design, if you're coming out of uni, even if you're starting by yourself, which nowadays is very common, and we have a lot of people also changing areas to come to work on design, right? Like I've been teaching UX, UI classes for about 1.5 years. In that time, I had at least 3 or 4 different types of like people with different professions coming in. Like I want to be a designer, or many times UX designers, because there are a lot of other professions that kind of align with that, communication specialists, psychologists, people that like to use and study these techniques to study like the human psyche and everything. But it's interesting because I always feel like dependent on where you are in your life, it also affects a lot your view on what design is. And like what we just all said of our beginnings, like we started with graphic design because back then probably it was what it was easier for us to think about. We can't expect someone that is like 16, 17, 18-year-old that is still starting to learn about how to think about themselves in the world and to go into a business and say, oh, now fix our problems and think about how we work. And I don't think it's easy for us to teach people to actually think like that. The experience affects a lot of that change.
It's highly contextual. I think you cannot talk about design by itself. You have to define the context that you're talking about design. Like a thing that is like a constant joke is that like, oh, I hate Comic Sans and all of that. Like, you probably hate Comic Sans in a restaurant, but there was a purpose. It was like designed for kids and to help them to just like write and to read. Like it was a little bit more friendly. I don't use Comic Sans, by the way. Like that's not the point. But there was like a purpose. Maybe I will once I have a kid. Like maybe they'll be like, oh, there you are. I've been waiting for you. But it has to be contextualized. Like I think design as a word throughout the years, to me, in my experience, has been like diluting its own meaning. And that is like, hence why it's important to define like a context to what we're talking about. It's becoming just a word.
But can we all agree that we hate papyrus?
Yeah.
Including the avatar title, yes.
Yeah. That's just too much.
No, but that's great. And it is also very much in line with what we see in the way that the industry changes, right? Like the context changes. So design adapts to the context. And it kind of goes into the why I started this. Like, it feels like design has been this innate skill to humanity that we adjusted to whatever means it comes when it comes. And it doesn't mean that it didn't exist before, because if we talk about the word design as it is nowadays, probably started in the 20th century somewhere, probably a little bit earlier, but not much more than that. But if you look at it, probably there were people way past in like medieval times that were doing things that nowadays would translate to what we define as design. So it's interesting to see that very much like other skills that nowadays we use that context to define them. This thing that we all do in different reasons in different spaces, also adapted to that, I would say. So it's been fun to see how everyone handles this, but I just like the context bits. Like, it's really cool.
Have you heard there's a common interview question? Some of you might have had this in interview. They say, design is the design of a design to create a design. Now name each of the meanings of the word design in this sentence. And then you're asked to try and pick apart what we just did, that in different contexts, the same word means different things. Now, I know a lot of swear words that you could do exactly the same thing to. But it's a fun exercise. So if you have time later, write it down and have a go.
They really ask that in interviews because that's mean.
But it comes to the point where, like, and I've had a couple of chats on this. For example, language has been a big player into the way that people define what we do. Be it that it's not just Western languages that kind of try to simplify what design is, be it into cultural context, the word design can mean different things, right? I know that probably when we were both starting, design in Portugal was much closer to drawing as in context than it was to actually what would be considered graphic design and stuff like that. And it already had a few years of at least design adapted to commercial type of work, like agencies and anything that had to do with advertising and stuff like that. But outside of that world, there was still not much of an awareness. Like, it was a graphical art. Yeah. You know, it was like it was always attached to the art. And that meaning and that context on how language translates these concepts has been one of the biggest, I'm not going to say pain points, but the most interesting things that we tend to bring into these conversations. People have different experiences because of how languages and meanings have affected their way of working and seeing things.
I generally am more comfortable talking about myself as a UX practitioner, just because I think there's less chances for people to misunderstand. Like, I know I'm a designer, but don't need to get into that debate.
It's easier to make it so that it doesn't sound like a designer.
Yeah,
okay.
Which is kind of fun, isn't it? Yeah. So.
That's actually a good question. Another take on is, how do you explain it to other people? And then, to your point, who are those people? So when I'm talking to my parents, I just say things like, I design digital experiences. That's it. We don't need to go any further. But when we're doing stakeholder management, it's not helpful to focus on the mock-up or on the thing. What's helpful is the outcome. So I'll say we're designing behaviors and habits. It's time-based. That's what we're designing, not the thing in front of us. And so I think you're right. We all find these little hooks or little tricks that help us to get our message across in different contexts.
Although I wish I'd found one for explaining stuff to my grandparents, because I'm pretty sure they died thinking that I fix printers. Or doing computer stuff.
Yeah. Which is still very normal. My mom still thinks of me as the IT guy that actually does some drawings. That's basically it. Going from the context, there's two topics that I always bring up in the way that I think the world has affected its views on design nowadays. One being technology and the tools that everyone has available. The second one being the communities and the space that we talk about this type of stuff. Things like this room, but now exist in the millions and thousands of people on the internet, kind of gathering and discussing what things mean. Do you think, on a first level, that tools specifically change the way that the people that we work with think about design?
Can I take this? Take this? Thank you. So you mentioned Canva earlier, and I have had a strong relationship with Canva of hate and now actually love. controversial opinion, but I actually initially designed my presentation in Canva. But in my old job, the wife of the CEO used to constantly design stuff in Canva and then push them out without passing by the proper design marketing department, because Canva makes people think that they are designers. However, shouldn't they, if they can design a thing, where does it go and where does it end? And then I see that the part where it becomes a profession is way more subtle than that. I don't actually have an issue with someone creating their own leaflet. I have an issue if they use just a generic blue instead of a brand blue, maybe, yeah. And I have an issue if they don't consider the end user. That's probably the main one. But definitely tools and the democratization of tools have changed a lot. I just don't think that they did it intentionally. The intention wasn't, it was never taught, oh, with this tool you can do these things, which is great, but you still need designers to do these other things, for example. It was always just oh, if I can use Photoshop, then I don't need a designer, or stuff like that. And it created more friction than what it needed to. There wasn't a curated message.
Yeah, but I think there's something great about that, because then you get to do mistakes and you're not thinking about the right thing to do with this tool. So you end up just fucking up the tool a bit, and you end up going to uncharted territories. And my opinion on this subject, it's actually a lot more analog. If you think about a pen and a pencil, if you're just doing a drawing, your mind, you know that with a pen you cannot erase, and with a pencil you can erase. So that's already a really, really big difference on something that ultimately can be the same goal, the same purpose. It just changes your approach. And once you have this different mindset, just because it's a pen versus a pencil, that's already a big difference in how you will behave with those tools. Regarding the digital context, I think the problem is that it's always a pencil. So you never have you're always thinking beta. You're never thinking about I should stop here. And I think that's the current problem with technology, is that you can quickly get into really deep details and forgetting the overview. So that helicopter metaphor is really important for us to refer back to. So I think the tools, it's very much the mindset that you approach them, and nowadays how you mix them up. I find that quite exciting as well.
I think this comes up a lot in coaching. Designers will come to me and say, I have to use this, I have to do that, I have to follow this. And they're feeling kind of uncomfy. If we go back to kind of the clothes metaphor, it's a bit like wearing a shoe that's really tight and giving you blisters, and you're just, you're being asked not to walk, you're being asked to run in this uncomfortable shoe. And really what we should be doing is finding tools that map our mindset, that help us to share our uniqueness with the world. And obviously then that's counter to finding a tool that works for everyone. So there's an element of having to learn the tool and its capabilities, but then pause and step back and say, well, what do I want to bring to this? What's my mindset, and how are these things serving my mindset as a creative thinker? Yeah. And I think that's also very similar, and you can correct me if I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's also similar to the intuition versus data argument, right? Because data is structured, it's a tool, it's out in the world, it's very similar. Whereas intuition, we also need that, right? We need to be gut-led. So maybe there's something for us in the next decade is to try and find that balance, because we've definitely swung far too reliant on data and reliant on the tooling around us. And we have a deficit of imagination, I think.
That's a great point of view, yeah. And I would say, if you want to clap, you can clap. And I would say, and I have these conversations a lot of times, education and the way that people actually learn things has a lot of weight into it. Most of what I've been saying about the entire project has even been around, if you look at the world and the way our literacy changed, how we evolved for the good or the bad, meaning those 50 years of amount of trash and everything, it comes with literacy too, and comes with the way that people can actually speak and communicate and learn and talk with each other. But then, for example, in design, and many people here are still on uni or have been on uni for a while. And I had conversations, for example, yesterday on a meetup with a bunch of students here, and they were like, okay, so what tools you guys learn? And they all go for the same thing, which is Adobe. It's like if it became this profession that was centralized under one tool type of stuff. Not one tool, but one toolkit, which feels very weird because before, designers were these creatives that kind of just, in terms of communications at least, they kind of could experiment with materials. They could be a little bit more artists in the way that they were. And then the moment we entered the digital age, we went from having a lot of liberty into just having one thing. All of a sudden, everyone has one of these in their hands. And a kid with Instagram can actually create like great communication materials. Someone that has CapCut can actually like work on building their own videos and telling their own stories and becoming designers of their own personal brand or whatever. And I think it kind of shifted a lot of that conversation again into a space where we can also do a lot of that. It's just that our starting point is very static in a lot of ways, I would say. At least it feels like that's my experience. I don't know if you guys agree or not, or anyone in the room.
This feels like kind of connected to what we were saying about the definition of design.
Yeah.
Which is very broad. Thinking of the tooling that we have at our disposal, I do really like when I love TikTok, okay?
Same.
It's fantastic. I've just seen people go on this thing and figure out a way to use it that the tool enabled them to, but then their creativity and intuition contributed to that, to create these bits of content that are incredible. Obviously, I'm not talking about the dancing bits, but there's communities there, and the way they communicate is so effective that it's literally a learning tool now. And that was there even design involved in that? I know that there was, but when you think about it, like how much of it was gut and playing with the tool and trying to fuck up the tool, you know? Exactly. But they created something that if we had sat down on pen and paper, we probably wouldn't have come up with it. So I don't know, I think I went on a tangent, but it was fun.
But it's a great tangent. Like, and then that's the whole point of these conversations, as many tangents as possible, because it feels like it's everywhere, not just in one place, right? And knowing that when we talk about tools, anything can be a tool, right? Like if we talk about the democratization of design, you can say that PowerPoint was one of the first digital design tools for many people. No. Word art. Of course, you guys used word art, of course. Don't come with those. But that's the thing, like, and even today, many of those tools are overpowered to the extent, like, if people actually take the time to learn about them, for 10, 15, 20 years, someone has been developing design tools to help people communicate better or to whatever, explain themselves better. But most people still will use them in the same ways, which is like what is intuitive, what is easy, what is fast. And they will start to enter this type of like in between of what design actually is or not, or what communication is or not. But it feels like we're at a stage that it's accessible to the point where anyone can feel like they are part of the process. And then comes in, for example, not the design tools as in the things that you can create visuals and stuff like that, but then the fact that now we have design tools that are built for professional designers, but then include other people in the process and stuff like that, right? Like that's even another tangent if you go there. So I feel that's interesting. But shifting a little bit, because we also are short on time, then on the communities and the content side. You talked about TikTok, and I think TikTok, for example, is an excellent example on how people start sharing information and knowledge. YouTube, another video has become a very strong way of content. But have you seen or feel, or do you use communities more recently to learn or content, or like any specific channels in the last few years? At least for me, I feel like it's been one of the biggest differences in the last 5 years in my career. Is like I went from being someone that had a small community, which was like my team and probably some locals, but nowadays I speak with people everywhere around the world about these things. And it's super interesting because it brings much more topics to the conversation, much more points of view. So just wanted to know about you guys.
I'd love to say that I do, because I do believe it's incredibly important, and I direct all of my juniors, mids, anyone in my team to find their communities. For me personally, I'm just so overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. I can't keep up anymore. It might also be because I used to be a lot in communities when I was younger, although that was fan fiction communities, so a different topic. But I do think communities are the real point of democratization. Like, people are helping each other. To me, that's still incredible when I think that I could go on a Slack channel of something, ask a question, and someone's gonna answer it. They don't know me, they're gonna get nothing out of it. Yeah, it's kind of fantastic. And I've had a lot of, in the past few years, I've had a lot of people joining my team that were career changers. And they have thrived thanks to communities, either the communities that they formed with the courses that they did, or communities online. But anyway, that's what gave them, if not the knowledge, at least the confidence. So I do think that they're incredible. I kind of wish they were around when I had the attention span.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's knowing that you're sharing your weirdness with someone else. Like, I think that's the beauty of like those niche. To me, like a community that has been with me like for like the past 15 years, like punk hardcore scene. It's like, it's something that I get so much from, and I know that I can go past the music because you have like a couple of chords and that's it. But then there's like the whole like devotion to something that you know that there's like a really, really slim chance to make money off of it. So I think what I like about that community is that it's quite genuine. There's like a bit of a network of support as well. And then you have like, if I'm in a design community, very likely I'll be talking about design. And that's what I sometimes end up feeling that I had to steer away from those communities a bit, like just being a bit of an observer, mostly because I was feeling like quite overwhelmed with the amount of things like you want to keep up, like new technologies. And so I have like some digital channels to keep up with like AR and artificial intelligence and type as well. But I feel like the idea of the community nowadays, to me, it's more meaningful if I get exposed to the things that I wouldn't be looking for. So communities that give me not what I want, but probably what I need, not knowing about that. So yeah, just enables of like serendipity. That's yeah.
I love that. I think for me, community is about connection. And I mean, if you'd said the word community to me a few years ago, I probably would have gone, like I would have repelled against it, because I felt like there was such a responsibility to show up, participate, contribute, give. And it was only recently that I realized, I think it's kind of, do you know The Art of Gathering, Priya Parker? Anyone? Yeah, a few nods. It's a brilliant book, and she's a great author, and she talks about having intentionality, having an intention for when you show up to any gathering, whether it's 5 people or hundreds. And I think that really gave me a sigh of relief. So I can intentionally show up to a community, and my role is going to be to listen. My role is going to be to listen and maybe reflect back. My role might be just to share one story. My contribution might be to help one person. Or it might be to, do a full-blown talk or something. But I think it's really helpful to remember that we are in control of what we contribute, and that there's no expectation in this, online world, and we choose how we show up and when and how much that suits our own mental health. There doesn't need to be that pressure.
Yeah, I think we were even talking about the fact that simple tools that communities strive, for example, like Discord, Benny feels very overwhelmed by it. I also felt the first time I ever used the Discord channel, I just joined and there was like a 30,000 people channel. So it's like I open it and there's a thread that goes like 2 messages per second. Like you can't read that. No human can read that. But some people like to use that method of like communication and it's fine. Nowadays, I actually manage Discord channels, which is even weirder. But it was because it kind of, the process of going into communities that had the space for me to learn how to enter that world, to learn how to ignore the noise when it's not beneficial for myself. That kind of helped me also be better at what I do nowadays on that. But it's interesting because it always feels like there are these nuggets of communities out there for anyone right now. If you feel like you want to learn from a tool, if you feel like you want to learn from some specific people, from the point of view of your diversity, which is also very common nowadays, I feel like it became that there's a space for everyone to kind of adjust to that reality a little bit more, while before we were still exploring it. And I don't think it went from we didn't knew about it. It went from like Web 1.0, people were starting to build communities, and then during the age of content creation, those communities died because it was all about me, and now again, it is about the collective effort as a whole. And it comes to the end of the day, it's like we want to be better together, we want to learn together, we want to push others. And design actually went from the me phase to the collective phase, I think, in that moment. And it feels very, very embracing right now. Okay, and since we have like 5 minutes, I'm gonna end with the final question that I ask everyone that I ever bring to my podcast, which is very simple. It's if you believe that design is really for everyone to make and to consume and to do whatever, or not, and if so, why?
The question is design for
everyone? For everyone.
Not should everyone be a designer? That's different.
It's different.
Okay.
Purposely different.
Okay. Yes, I believe that design should be for everyone. As long as you're experiencing things around you, as long as you're interacting and seeking connection, I think that we all deserve to receive and to give connection, to connect first to ourselves and then to connect to others. And the best design is when you connect to yourself really, really well so that you can give more to others. And I think design is constantly iterating on those two levers. And if they're out of balance, it's normally because we've over-optimized on one more than another. I think that's what excites me about the world of design. How can we better connect to ourselves and to each other? Cool.
It's a tricky one. I've actually been thinking about that a lot because it's really difficult to talk about design is for everyone by not talking about design, because I think everyone implies like everyone. And I think like the imbalances that we see many times is that we didn't focus on niche of people that actually need to be like elevated compared to others. Like I could be talking about racism, of course, it's like a big theme, but there's like so many other things that's like accessibility that are like quite important. So I think just like understanding that by saying design for everyone, and I'm feeling I'm not going to answer. There's 3 moments, which is just like, are you aiming for justice, equality, or equity? And I think those 3 things can exclude some people, but maybe they will get you to the greater good if I expand to everything. It's a tricky question. Thank you. Made me think. I think that's what to me design is for everyone. It's thinking about like everyone from individual to their context, and ultimately like you may have like a wider community that is like, everyone will like blue. You know.
Mine is similar in the sense that design should be for everyone, not in the one size fits all, because that's not no. Design should be for everyone, but right now we don't even know who everyone is.
That's a good one. Yeah, drop the mic. There you go. And with that, I think we're done here. Thank you all for accepting the invitation to come on stage and having this conversation. I hope it at least brought a little bit of a different perspective to everyone on actually the amount of stuff that we touch on every day as professionals in this area, be it in context or out of it. And I hope that you can all go out with this question and think for yourselves if it really makes sense, if design is for everyone. Thank you.